Okay, I got the thumbs up. Welcome everybody. Both those of you in person, and I know there's folks watching online as well. We always stream our local governance seminars these days because there's lots of people who aren't able to make it in person but still want to participate. So thanks to Josh as well for making that possible. So it's a real pleasure for me today to have Dan Mathieson with us. As all of you probably know by now, Dan is our Distinguished Practitioner in Residence for the year 2016, and we're so glad to have him with us. And he's going to be doing a variety of things during the year. He's going to be running a couple of half-day workshops with our students on specific policy issues, coming into some classes, and so I'm really pleased to have him in here for a local governance seminar. And for those of you who don't know, Dan is in his fourth term, right, as mayor of Stratford, Ontario. And he also has a lot of relevant experience to what he's going to be talking about today, because among other things, as mayor of Stratford, he helped to bring a campus of the University of Waterloo to Stratford. And he's also a chair of the Board of Governors of King's University College, our neighbors here. And so he's thought and acted a lot in this field. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing his insights on developing a good relationship between cities and universities. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks so much. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for making the time either to join us in person or online. As Martin had mentioned, I have had the unique opportunity to be involved in university life and community life and how they come together and intersect in two different ways. First, as mayor of the city of Stratford in 2006, we had signed an agreement with the University of Waterloo to investigate putting a campus in Stratford. And in 2009, a formal agreement was ratified whereby the city would actually have a greenfield development of the University of Waterloo, a digital media campus specializing in global business and digital arts and Masters of Digital Experience and Innovation. Now, it's interesting to note that that was a greenfield development. So you can get ahead of a lot of problems in a greenfield development by having the time to plan and think about where you locate it, some of the issues Western University. An interesting thing there, I've had time to serve on that board, which is in a very established old neighborhood of North London, where a lot of issues develop over time because as we've matured as an organization and grown, the neighborhood has also matured and grown. And we've had to work at pinch points along the way, not only on how we interact as neighbors, how we interact with regards to our traffic, our housing issues. We are, of course, an affiliate of the University of Western Ontario. There's always traffic issues that pertain to students getting back from one campus to the other. There is the debate about the light rapid transit line and where it would intersect through not only this campus, but how it would affect the 3,500 plus students that attend King's and how will they be put forward. And then, of course, overall, how do students become part, and it doesn't matter whether it's a greenfield or an existing university, how do students become part of the community which they go to study in? A little bit about myself. My undergrad degree was at the University of Guelph. And I enjoyed, while I was there, not only living on campus, but off campus. And one of the things I found when I lived off campus is that often the students that lived off campus were not always welcomed by their neighbors as much as maybe you would think. And that had a lot to do with some of the poor planning that maybe went into some of these universities in the earlier days where there wasn't the ability to start putting designations in for certain neighborhoods and density restrictions, actually planning out other aspects. And over time, as Guelph grew, they kind of got into this situation. And there was always the catch-up that communities play. And I'm sure London's no different. I know Waterloo has been no different with Laurier and Waterloo. But their challenge is that you then have to react. And reaction often comes in a form where people want action quicker than they're willing to take consultation. And some of those challenges we've tried to. So I'm going to start off with some of the benefits that we've had in Stratford with regard to being a greenfield. And there's a couple of documents I'll leave for Martin and Josh to share with all of you. But one of them is the actual document that is, of course, a public document, but the City of Stratford and Waterloo's document that actually laid out the contribution the city would make, which was 10 million in cash plus land for a building, how it was all to be set forward, and what were going to be some of the O's or kind of opportunities between the two of us to work together, and what the commitments were we were making going forward. The other was the document that I think everybody should take a look at some point in time, because I think often people forget that universities, well, a great place of higher education and learning, are also a great place of economic stimulus and, of course, economic activity. And this is the Deloitte and Touche study done for the City of Stratford about an economic impact for the City of Stratford and our region by putting a campus in place, what it meant. And it's not only meant to be an opportunity to drive economic activity, but it was also meant for an opportunity for Stratford to stem a couple problems. Back when we struck our strategic plan in the late 1990s, it was called 2010 and Beyond, Community Excellence with Worldwide Impact. And one of the challenges we had, though, was that the City of Stratford had an aging population over the provincial median. We had started to see young people move out of the community, and it was because we had no reason to draw them back in. Higher education in communities such as London, Waterloo Region, on to Toronto, Mac, and other places had an allure for people to go away to school. And we were finding that people, after they completed school, would actually stay in those communities for the next number of years to start a family. If we were lucky, at some point in their late 30s and early 40s, people would decide to start coming back home so they could reside within the community they grew up. And we wanted to stop that, because one of the challenges we had is that we did not want to become a rural community that did not have or had to bank on people actually coming back. So we got concerned about it, and that was one of the reasons we did it. So we've had great luck in moving forward with this with the City of Stratford. So we did it. Now, why did we pick digital arts and global business? Well, because at the time, David Johnston, now His Excellency the Governor General, was president of Waterloo, and we took a 2006 Council of Canadian Academies study, which is all the universities and colleges in the country get together every couple of years and really chart out where they think the economy is heading over the next time horizon of a 30 to 40 year planning. And one of the areas that they identified, on the upper axis was jobs and the outer axis was money in the future economy, was actually digital media. It was off in the top right corner where you want it to be. And David Johnston said, with Stratford's creative class, the Stratford Festival, of course, which is a major part of our economy, the connection to the tool makers in Waterloo Region, being those that are making the hardware, and of course software, the tool users, was a coming together. So that's how we ended up in that. And we've been very fortunate. But one of the foresight things that we had actually done was actually strike a committee called the Town and Gown Advisory Committee. Early on, we decided that the City of Stratford needed to get together and put a committee together to deal with issues around providing multidisciplinary forum for people to express their concerns. We wanted to facilitate communication amongst constituent groups, whether it be service clubs, neighborhood organizations, the Downtown Business Association, the Chamber of Commerce, the city, the university, or the Students' Federation. We wanted to make sure there was a forum for everybody to have a voice. We wanted to be able to identify and assist in developing problems of common interest in a forum that was completely known to everyone and transparent and open. We wanted to promote and support activities to ensure a safe and healthy community. One of the things we did, we also have that committee report through a city subcommittee so that their meeting minutes actually get to City Hall and get on the agenda as part of the public record, and that council members have the opportunity to see issues that are being discussed at the local level and to make sure that if they had a broader public interest or a broader overall constituent interest, that they had the opportunity to bring it forward. And this has been very good for us. I sit on it as an ex officio member. We have 2 members of council, an administrative rep from the University of Waterloo, 2 student representatives from the University of Waterloo, one being an undergrad and one being one of the graduates, an alternate student representative with voting rights, so in case they couldn't make it, and one of the people within the residential area around the university. Only members of the organization citing the composition were allowed to vote, but we had a large non-voting resource group. Everyone from the Huron-Perth Realtors Association, who are going to give us feedback about student housing issues, the police service, the fire service, community development, engineering and public works, as I mentioned, the Perth District Health Unit, Conestoga College, not actually involved in the university, but actually gave them an opportunity to comment. And that actually allowed us to start to create synergies where there were programs and ideas or problems that were going on at the university that then allowed us to take to the Adult Education Learning Center at Conestoga College and work towards them. And those meetings have been very, very good. Now, some of the issues that we have in Stratford to start with was that the university, of course, it's great when you do economic impact studies. They say if you have 1,000 students, you'll have X. Well, we all know that universities don't open the door today and a flood of students come walking in. So you have to ramp up over time. And in Waterloo's case, they started with a master's program with just 25 students. I'm happy to tell you today, in their 4th year in Stratford, there are close to 500 students, undergrad and graduate, who are part of this program. And over time, it will continue to grow. But as the program, building critical mass meant that faculty wasn't in Stratford early on. Students would actually reside in Waterloo and come over to the new campus in Stratford. They'd be bussed over. Some would stay if they were in the master's program. But the undergrad faculty and undergrad students went back and forth between the two. Now, as we've created enough critical mass, they can start to bring programming right to Stratford, start to reside professors and programmatic issues right within the campus, and to start actually building that up. So it now has put us in a couple of situations. One is we actually have now to identify an area where they can build student residences. And we are going to grapple with the decision at some point in time coming through this, how big a student residence do you want, and how do you want to locate them within the downtown core or close to it, on the bordering residential neighborhoods that are going to work with the residential area but allow the students an opportunity to reside in the community. So that's one of the challenges we're going to have. And we will hear from some residents that say, I'm okay with 30 rooms, but I don't want 60. We're probably going to hear from the universities, and often universities don't own and build their own residences anymore. They actually do 20-year design, build, operate leases with private enterprise. And what we're going to find is that the private enterprise are probably going to tell us that, no, we need closer to 100 to make this whole thing. And somehow through this whole piece, we're going to balance it out. One of the interesting things we've had come forward in Stratford, as I mentioned, the Stratford Festival runs April start previews, and they end in late October, early November. The high point of our season is for people to have an opportunity to be in Stratford over the summer. Well, those student residences will be predominantly in use from September to April. So we've started looking at opportunities. We've had private enterprise come to say, why don't you give us the opportunity to run it as a student residence for 8 months and actually deal with your tourism issue and accommodation issue in the summer. And as a greenfield, we have the opportunity now to say, how does that work? How do we limit that? How do we make sure that it's viable? And does that allow us then to go to the lower number of rooms because there's 12-month occupancy as opposed to 8? So those are some of the opportunities we have. Other issues that have developed, and we've had to deal with them with group homes and of course bed and breakfast, but now we're finding students. So bed and breakfast would operate very successfully for 5 months of the year, but through the winter months we're always slow. We're seeing the bed and breakfast now step in and want to take in students to room within their home, but how many of those should you allow versus a quaint couple from Michigan who want to see the city continues to deal with them. They have been very thoughtful in their work, and they have come back to us with certain things they'd like to see to ensure that if people want to operate 12 months a year, that they are given the opportunity and how they can continue to integrate that into the neighborhood. One of the pieces I would say that's really worked for us is that we have a very open dialogue between the university. We have taken the university students, at least 3 of our technology problems, and said, here's a problem the city has with regards to an application as it relates to garbage collection and waste reduction and of course recycling. We've given it to the students, and they've actually turned around and developed the app. They've held the public open house. They've got the feedback from the information from the residents. They've held the focus groups, and then they went away and designed an application for us and presented it back. Now that might seem not like a lot, but it's allowed people to start going into the university and actually using it as a type of community center. Last year alone, there was over 125 community events and meetings held within the university building that had not a university component to them, other than they were the host. There was a chance for residents to come in the building and to actually interact with students and see them at use. And that has been very successful for us because, as I said, a small community of Stratford, 35,000, contributing $10 million of cash to build a university, that'd be the equivalent of a city of London spending $100 million to do a similar project, 10 times the size. You can imagine if the City of London was putting out $100 million today, there'd be a lot of interest in how that is going to benefit the majority of residences. So we have worked to make sure that the residences interact on a regular basis with our students. We have held things like my annual Mayor's Gala for the Community Foundation in that building so that students had the opportunity to play host. And also later next week, they will actually play host to the community when they show what their second semester projects were for the fourth year students on different innovation pieces, 4K cameras, 3D printers. A lot of those things I think are allowing people now to understand what the students do within that building, which gives them a much more respect for the students as they reside in their neighborhood, because they're no longer a group of four that order pizza and drink beer and have parties. They're actually very smart individuals and people understand what they're studying within the building. And that has been an awareness campaign. So one of the things I've learned through a greenfield and having the ability at the front end to design the system is one, to closely integrate the university into the community, to create it as what I would call a community center, to allow people to feel that that building is just not for the students of the facility and the faculty, but also to be part of the community. And that then, of course, builds mutual respect. The second that I think has been important is to try to tie local business to the university, whether it's in auto manufacturing in Stratford, whether it's in agricultural production, whether it's in actual farming. We have tried to make sure that the students that are within that building understand all sectors of our local economy. And we have tried to host days within those sectors, and for the broader Chamber of Commerce and Business Improvement area, have them into the building and allow them to interact with the students and share information between themselves. And one of the examples that came out of it, students in the downtown restaurants and hotels had come up with the concept of course, creating a meal card that allowed them to start eating in the downtown core. And their hope is, as retailers in the downtown core, that when these residences are built, that they don't actually house cafeterias or feeding facilities. The economy that's needed so those students have a place to eat, dine, and be part of the community. Now it's interesting, you can do that in a city the size of Stratford, as I said, which is 30,000 or 30, I guess 34 is what the census latest stats show us. But you can do that in those communities. It's tough here in North London. When you think back to when Western started over 145 years ago, I think is the number. But that time, this was a farmer's field at the edge of the city that has grown up around it. The business district is pushed out a little ways. So we have the unique opportunity to really integrate each element of the community. And we continue to try to do so in various ways. One of the things that I think we've also learned, though, I thought there is a huge disconnect. To say that Stratford has a dichotomy of economy and, of course, social class is very fair. We have a very interesting perspective where over 30% of our population, just over 30%, probably don't make a living wage. They are in lower end jobs. Some of them are in hospitality and tourism that see a large season and then through the winter don't make as much. So there is that challenge where when they see the university, there is some misunderstanding of what does that actually mean for me? What does that mean for my family? What does that mean for my community? So we've also tried to find ways to make sure that the various segments of the economy communicate with each other. And that is why things like the meal plan are important, but also hosting events within the facility for those individuals to come in and use the equipment. And I think that is one of the things that are going to give people the ambition and maybe attention that they often think, maybe I should upgrade my skills. Maybe that's a way that we can actually start taking people from the continuum of skills development and saying, I want to start moving through. I want to now take courses. And we, of course, have the Adult Learning Center with Conestoga, but you do also now have the opportunity to take some of Waterloo's courses as an adult learner as well. And is there an opportunity for us then to create a culture, a further culture of learning within our community that engages people at every economic and social level? Other things that have developed, because it was a greenfield and we had lots of time, we went to both school boards, the Huron-Perth Catholic and the Avon-Maitland District School Board, and we had them start to design courses that were pre-university for students in grades 7 and above that allowed those students to come over to the university for class and actually use the same technology equipment and start doing pre-university courses. And they have been a great success with students as early as grade 7 and 8, now understanding what they want to do with their life and starting to, not that I agree with it 100%, but starting to position themselves to take some of the courses early on that will give them the skills they need to be successful, whether it's in digital media or global business or digital arts, or whether they want a master's of design, experience, and innovation. So those pieces have allowed now kids to go home and tell the story. We've created storytellers. Kids to go home and tell the story that, Mom, Dad, I was at the university today. This is what I did. And parents are now seeing a lot of benefit to that. So those are the greenfield opportunities. There are going to be challenges, though, and I mentioned around residential properties and how we're going to build that. But as I mentioned, because it's greenfield, we're anticipating problems in advance. We've joined the Town and Gown Association of Ontario. We often go to a lot of these conferences with them and speak to best practices that we learn from other communities around how the consultation piece will happen. And we're learning that often what happens is you start to lay out parameters and you take them to those neighborhoods. And what some people might be willing to accept it, 22 students and hate to use it, a 500 meter block, they're willing to accept those. Other neighborhoods would say, I'm not willing to accept that. And we're going to start working our way through and see how we house, knowing the maximum population. The study calls for 2,000 students within 20 years, probably going to be somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500, I think, reasonably within the next 10 to 15 years. How are we going to house 1,000 to 1,500 students? And I think it'll be a mix of integrating them into existing neighborhoods, building student housing, and then of course then building the transit routes around them. And that is another aspect that we've been able to take into consideration as we continually upgrade every couple of years our transit routes to take into consideration ride flow and number of riders on the buses, is where are the students living and how's that going to impact the times on the buses. Now, let's be honest, Stratford is not London Transit. We have 6 buses that run on a 30-minute route. They go out from the center and come back in, but we have to be mindful of a 30-minute ride is the maximum a student's going to have to get downtown, and it's a 2-minute walk from the terminal to the school. But we have to think about how that's going to integrate, and will there become a time where if certain sections of the city take on more students, will that bus be enough to get them all in and out at certain times? And how does that integrate with the ridership we have within our transit system? Because right now in Stratford, if you're in grade 7 and 8 in the public system, you don't actually have a bus take you to school. You're expected that you would take a city bus. So we have kids that take city buses in the morning. So we have over 400 bus passes alone sold to the local school board where those students are riding the buses. So we're going to have to start thinking about when the university continues to grow and classes are going to start at 9 a.m., will those routes have enough room on the buses to actually get all the students to where they have to go either to the elementary schools, or will they have enough to get them to the university? Great problems to have. Now on the King's side of things, so I've told you all about how great it is to be part of a greenfield development. On the King's side of things, there's lots of challenges being part of a very, very, what I call a mature neighborhood in North London. Now we've had great opportunity with our neighbors in North London and our council member, Phil Squires. We do have regular discussions with him. But if you think of King's, we have, of course, St. Peter's Seminary, and then we across the street there, the Diocese of London has their office. And then there's King's, which sits on a very small tract of land. Mind you, some of our students come over here and some go back over there on patterns, but on Brochdale, as an example, we've continued to grow between Brochdale and Epworth and in that area. We've had to build student residences within that area. We've had to buy townhouses so that we can start to build ourselves a buffer zone. So if you're a university, like King's is, trying to grow within its context and its small footprint, when those pinch points come up, money has to be spent. So in the past, we've had to buy houses along Epworth because they were for sale. And we thought, well, the best interest is to buy it, to find a use, and to start building ourselves a buffer from the families that live in the area. And the buffer then becomes, is it a visiting faculty home where we put 2 faculty members that are here for a period of time? Is it an area for mature students that meet certain criteria that will allow us to transition from family to mature student into the student life? What do we do as a community? Well, we try to use King's as a community center. We've just built our new Darrell J. King Student Life Center, and we've tried to make sure that that facility much like we did in Stratford, becomes a community center for the community. But the challenge with this is parking still becomes an issue. 3,500 students on such a small footprint have caused us to have to look at various aspects of parking where we put people. And as you may know, along the back of our student residences and of course along St. Peter's Seminary is of course Upper Thames River Conservation designated land as floodplain. So some of our land that we have, we're not even allowed to park on. And we have to be respectful of that. Of course, the large expanse of St. Peter's Seminary, which is over 20 acres of beautiful grass out the front and around the sides, I don't think if we were to make a deal and start paving that over, people in Old North there would be very happy to see 200 and 300 cars in a grassed area that they used to take their family over to spend time with their kids when they grew up. So we have had to work on certain things of whether students from this campus just transfer over on the About Town transportation bus that we run between the two facilities. We've had to talk about limiting the number of parking passes that we actually issue to students and faculty to come into the campus. I'm always happy when I go at the end of the day if I can find a parking spot for a meeting at 4 o'clock, because a lot of the student courses end and people reside back out. Other challenges that have come along, though, I think are because early on, and in the past, universities had been treated as an institution all unto itself and weren't integrated into community development and community thinking. And what happened on the campus was kind of their own little nation, and they got to make their own decisions or try to make as many of them as they could following municipal regulations. And they grew and they grew and they grew. And the land that they had that they built up over many years as a buffer was quickly evaporated. And some of it was because we took commercial interests onto university campuses. If you look at Waterloo, they have an incredible research park that has eaten up most of their developable land for the university. There are commercial interests on that land. That's not a bad thing, but it has led them now to have to look at higher density levels within facilities on the campus. And that causes even more taxing on municipal services. I'm sure that if we continued to grow in the King's University College area and wanted to add another 1,000 students, I would hear from our friends at London City Council, probably the planning office and Public Works, about the sewer capacity within the area. How does that affect water services within the area? How is that going to affect the planning for the LRT? Which, you know, for us, we know we're not big enough to say that it should come by our door, but we are mindful enough to say it's got to come close enough that it helps offload some of the transit issues. And if you don't come close enough, some of the other problems I mentioned with regards to traffic flow, parking on the street, all those things don't get addressed. And then the overall arching theme of LRT being a great mover of people in and out of the downtown and the different segments of the areas of the city are not going to happen. So we tried to start taking a more holistic view of King's on a longer term vision. What does King's look like, not in 5 to 10 years, but how do we exist in 20 to 30 years? And is size really the determinant of being a good institution because you continue to grow? Or is the quality of the programming and the number of students that come through that program and receive employment on the other end really the determinant of what is a good university experience and, of course, a fine institution to graduate from? And that is a debate that, of course, as you know, has to go through not only the Senate and the faculty side, it has to go through the Board of Governors and the business side. Because for all these decisions we make, there are ramifications. On a greenfield development, you get to put off a lot of the fiscal challenges for a number of years. On an existing infill development or continual growth of a university, those fiscal challenges meet you each and every year. Another example I would give that has happened at King's, which I think talks about social development and social cause, is how do you get students to understand the social issues of a community they reside in? How do you bring poverty, poverty reduction, Ontario Works and welfare? How do you bring in the disabled, the AODA, the Ontarians Act for Disabilities? How do you start to address those in the thought and life of the student at the university earlier on, so that when they try to integrate into the community, they understand that they are part of it? In Stratford, with the University of Waterloo campus, we have made them part of the United Way campaign. 1 in 3 people in Huron and Perth County access United Way service every day. How do we get those students to understand that they have the benefit to be in a university when there are other people that are not so fortunate? And we're trying to do that so that we can build better citizens, just like this institution at Western or King's does. But how do you continue to put that in people that come from a family in another community to be here as an 8-month resident or a 4-year resident? Or how do you get them to consider London as a home after university? I think that's the great challenge that we're finding in rural Ontario. If you look north of Stratford, northwest of Stratford, you're seeing the hollowing out of communities across Huron and Perth counties. Clinton, Seaforth, Goderich, Wingham, Listowel. They're starting to lose Mitchell. They're starting to lose manufacturing and other employment opportunities. So students are saying, well, I can't go back to the community I was from because there are no jobs. And why am I going to want to stay in London if I don't understand it or I don't have a connection to the community? So building the connection is really going to be important. It's going to have to be understanding what the students all believe in when they come to the community. So one of the things I'd like to see start to happen is how, not only in Stratford, but all universities, how do we survey our students and find out what experience in their community they've adopted for their education, what it means to them? What are the things that they want to learn about that community, and how do we put those groups together? And I think that is going to be the challenge going forward, to add what I would call the humanitarian side of education. Marks and degrees are something we can all work to get. Developing the human spirit and the human kindness and the human element is what I think defines good universities from universities. And I think that's something that we all want to strive to do. When I talk to people that go to Mount Allison out in New Brunswick, they talk about what they actually learn living in New Brunswick. They talk about how they're part of the community. They talk about how the community players puts people in the community that like theater with students who want to be amateur actors. They talk about how they collect food for the food bank. They talk about how they volunteer with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, how they work at palliative care at the local hospital. And that experience I had by going out there on my own to learn about it taught me an awful lot, that in the smaller universities, the smaller communities, they've actually found a way to integrate and actually build that value proposition within students. And so in these larger centers that we get to, and I always aspire that Stratford will have a great university with Waterloo as a partner, but how are we going to build those same values that when students finish their education and they walk away, they remember Stratford for more than a place they had their undergrad. Not a place that had a great bar, not a place that had a really good party, but how they actually had a place where they felt they connected and ignited their passion in some other element of their life. And those are challenges. I would say UPEI does the same thing. University of Prince Edward Island, another small institution in Charlottetown, has done a very good job at building not only the comprehensive side of the university, but also the professional designations within the university. And they have done a very good job of connecting people with that community, where the veterinary students that study at UPI are actually helping farmers within that community on a volunteer basis, care for their fleet or their animals. You're having agricultural agronomy students actually working with the potato farmers on how they're going to get better yield out of the crops. You're getting the MBA students from the McDougall School of Business working with downtown merchants and the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency on how they're actually going to start doing business plans for small business in that area. And those are the aspects I think that build. I think the other thing that happens often, and I'll wrap up with this and take some questions, is that universities, because they're a creature of the province for funding, and some federal funding through various programs like NSHIRC and CIRC and any number of other acronyms that none of us completely understand, they become very focused on meeting parameters that are set at the provincial and national levels on what the programming needs to be. And there is never ending evolution where they need to meet the needs of what's the latest program? What are the new teachables? What do I need to deliver so that I can continue to get funded at my university for X number of students, so many faculty, heat, hydro, and so much square feet? And I think that's a disconnect from being part of a community, because the community, as a resident of the community, they don't think along those terms. So the faculty or the administration has this challenge where a lot of what they do is dictated at senior levels of government based on parameters that sometimes don't return ROI, return on investment, and don't actually foster growth and community development. And they're situated though within the communities, where communities need that growth and development. So there has to be a coming together over the next while of aligning provincial and federal funding with actually communities, so that a university doesn't feel they need to put more students in so that they can gain the funding so they can keep the program going. And I think that all comes down to the value we put on education, not only, as I said, from the marks and the degree, but also on the humanitarian kind of touchy-feely side of things of how communities develop. And at the end, if I was to leave you with something, I would say it's the Japanese model, which I use an awful lot. It's Kaizen, it's continuous improvement. The evolution of community development and interaction with university and communication of such is a never-ending problem. It continues to evolve each and every day. It will continue to evolve. I would say a holistic approach, bringing all the stakeholders to the table, is important, and an opportunity to build that sense of community and what your students really feel is important is that what will differentiate a positive experience for students and the residents, but also a lasting impression that will lead to community growth. Thank you. Questions? Yes.
Are you at all worried about overcapacity due to the aging society? I mean, we've seen a massive increase in the capacity of our post-secondary institutions, but we know that we're facing a demographic reality that's going to reorder the size of cohorts over time. And places that receive a lot of immigrants, like the GTA, are stabilizing that, but places outside are less able to do that. And already we're seeing things like Lakehead, I believe, pulling the plug on its campus in Aurelia. You know, are we setting, when these things are being viewed by smaller communities as a way to capture value and generate economic development for themselves, is there a risk associated with that?
They're very much a risk, and I think it goes back to the province of Ontario not having a long-term view of how they were going to fund universities. I think that's why you hear every university talk about wanting to increase their number of international students. And that's for two reasons. One, to fill space, and two, because there's no cap on what you can charge an international student as opposed to a student from Ontario. And I think that's a pure economic argument. I think the other thing that we've missed the boat on is that university education, well, I've been very much benefited from having 2 degrees at and one at a graduate level. I think the problem is skills development, skilled trades development is something that has been severely overlooked. And if you look at the manufacturing decline in southwestern Ontario, and people got very excited about the last 6 months when the dollar began to drop, that the manufacturing jobs are coming back to southwestern Ontario, that is a fallacy, because we're finding we do not have enough skilled trades to meet the demands of some of the work that's going to be there. In Stratford today, I can give you the number for partners of employment. They're an agency funded by the province who work probably for 10 to 15 of our large manufacturers. And they have over 200 unfilled skilled jobs in manufacturing sector at Stratford, because people have maybe decided, because of the growth of universities, they would head off to university and they come out, but the job that they've been trained for doesn't exist, or the number of jobs that exist aren't there anymore, and they need to look at how they need to become employable. And I think the other problem is people need to realize that education is not a period of time, it's a continual movement across life. I didn't do my master's degree until I started it when I was 32 years old when I was elected mayor. And I took it for 4 years as a part-time student to learn. And I continually look at education courses for me today to continue learning so I can continue to be relevant in the economy and in my future job prospects. And I think that's the other thing that we need to instill in people. So it's a realignment of the number of positions and where they are in the institutions, and it's a realization that education is a continuum in life and not a period of a certain age group. And
actually, I have a related question. Let me start by saying I'm a proud undergraduate, graduate of an undergraduate institution, but very small university in Quebec called Bishop's University. And so I have great sympathy for small universities. They were very good for me. But I wanted to talk about the same kind of things Zach was saying about institutions in smaller places. I hope I'm not betraying the confidence from a conversation we had a long time ago, ancient history, when you were a student here, I think. You told me that Western was not interested in having a campus at Stratford because Western's strategic plan did not involve moving off this campus. Subsequently, they have moved off for medical school to Windsor because they didn't have much choice. But I actually think that was probably a good strategy for Western because it does trouble me, this idea that somebody might think it's a good idea to have all kinds of different programs scattered around southwestern Ontario. For example, if Martin's trying to expand the local government program, which you've been trying to do, maybe some community would make it very attractive to do that. And we could have the local government program in St. Thomas or Chatham. And we'd all move there and there would be a self-contained group. But the problem would be that we'd be removed from all the apparatus, all the face-to-face contact with people in a whole bunch of different disciplines. So I guess that's my question. Can the Stratford model realistically be replicated for other communities by decentralizing big universities like Western to a whole bunch of different places?
I think, Andy, and you're absolutely right, and I have no problem that you didn't betray any confidence. I tell that story whenever a Stratford student wins a digital media award. I said, to think Western didn't want us. But the funny thing about it is I think in the period of time that they were allowing this expansion, a lot of communities were trying to find a way to bring young people in because it became an economic driver and a population issue for them. And that's why a lot of it happened. That's why the Aurelias, the Brantfords, the Stratfords, the Cambridge, the Huntsvilles, all of those came to be. I think what happened though is the universities were allowed to do it with nary a word from the ministry and no longer term strategy of how that was going to work. Will it work in a campus? And the local government program is great, but you're never going to get the size that you need to drive the interaction and the experience you're going to need for those students. The beauty about digital innovation and global business or global arts and business is that those students have to take so many social science and humanities courses before they can actually start taking the technology and business courses.
Can they take those courses at Waterloo?
They did now, but they're going to move out to Stratford. So there is going to be the opportunity where they're going to start having that and how we get our building back and how it works going forward in the future if that happens. Because if that ceases to exist where there's enough critical mass to give that experience to the university student that is not just, I went there, got a degree and left, and the university says, look, we've got to retract, then I understand that completely. In the absence of that though, let's remember in the early 90s, let's say Paul Martin's first budget, where he, of course, cut severely onto education and healthcare, and of course, that came down into the province of Ontario. We saw Fanshawe, we saw Conestoga College, who had massive numbers of campuses in smaller communities, just close the doors, just pull them all back into the center. The School of Nursing left Stratford. The technology trades left Stratford. They went back to Doon. Fanshawe had a footprint at one time, Simcoe, St. Thomas, Woodstock, they started to shrink programming back to the middle. And I think that was because they dealt with the economic reality that is going to hit universities soon. And I think the other piece is when you allow a university to go out these communities and try to be all things to all people, that's where the problem comes from. when I think Waterloo has maybe done a few things right about it is they've taken specific faculties and disciplines and put them in specific areas to say, there, that's how we can do this. They're not trying to run an arts program, a liberal arts program, or a social science program in Stratford. They're trying to run a very focused piece. Architecture at Cambridge, environmental planning at Huntsville. I think those pieces work. You've seen Nipissing pull out of Brantford and head back north to North Bay because they just can't operate enough of a faculty of education. And they were putting students through a program that was not going to have enough jobs on the other side of the outcome. And I think that's the piece. So you're absolutely right. I think Western's decision at the time was probably a good one. I think the challenge I think some had with in our process with it might have been how long you date somebody and how much time you put into a program and tell everybody kind of what you're thinking before they tell you they don't want to get married. And that was part of that might be part of their frustration.
So Dan, it's a very interesting presentation. So thank you. I want to, I guess, ask you about any thoughts that you might have on how a relationship between a university and the city, university, and community can change. And because, I mean, as Andy was alluding to right now, I mean, I think that, and as you were saying as well, I think the incentives that universities face and their own interests aren't necessarily pointing in the direction of the kind of integration that you're advocating always, partly because of the funding and regulatory structure that comes from top down and isn't much influenced by municipal issues. Partly because of the academic and facilities and other advantages of really kind of concentrating on a campus, right? And I think, frankly, we see that very much here at Western, where our main campus is a campus that isn't in many ways very well integrated with the City of London. And more so in which the top leadership seems to have limited interest in that engagement. So what can happen to shift that? Should that even shift, or is that in the case of a big institution like Western?
In Stratford, we talk about, do we need a new library? Well, if we need a new library and the university continues to grow, there's only so much money. And we've already had discussions. How would that look? We know that there's barriers to how that would look because we'd have to go to Ministry of Training, colleges, university, and convince them that the funding that they would put into a university library or a space such as that would have to change so that the community could be part of it. We'd have to figure out how the collection would be. How would the staff work? Then there's the union issues of, are they faculty of the university and are they CUPE members of the city? How are they going to? So those are a lot of the issues that I think are on the horizon. And for larger universities like Western that are already established in communities, I think the approach around community hubs is probably what's going to need to happen. If you asked probably half the people that go to UH, are they on the university campus or not? Most of them wouldn't think they were on the university campus when they went to UH. They just think they went to the hospital. Most of them probably don't realize that, a lot of what goes on here is actually predicated on the research done with the students that go over there. And that's why there is such great care in this community. That's why Victoria campus is the way it is. And I think that's one of the things we need to find a way to integrate more and to do some planning. There are going to be needs that we're both going to have. And whether it's around resource planning, number of employees, whether it's around footprint and flexible space, I think would be great. City Hall is a good example in most communities. A council chamber sits vacant a lot of hours of the week. There is no reason why that couldn't be a community hub for service clubs, advisory committees of the city. Our auditorium in Stratford at our City Hall, which was built in 1898, actually houses our community players. They use it probably 45 days a year to put on production. And those are some of the community hubs things that are smaller communities are doing because our economies of scales have contracted a lot sooner. And now you're seeing it come into play in universities and larger cities where they don't have the growth to continually fuel them. I had great deference and respect for Hazel McCallion, but the growth she experienced from 1978 to her retirement in 2014 was phenomenal. And when I first got into local government in the mid-90s, people talked about they had no debt, they had money in the bank, they had schools that were already built before neighborhoods were up, they had fire halls all ready to go. They were a great model of a city. Today, if you talk to Bonnie Crombie, they don't have integrated transit planning that's gone very well. They have cash reserves are an all-time low. The development of the city is at build out, and they now have 30 and 40-year infrastructure that needs to be replaced. And that is the contraction that's going to go through them. And as they try to do that, we need to look at public spending across not only universities, hospitals, public schools, colleges, municipalities. How do we take that all together and start figuring out how we build flexible space? But it's going to require people to break down silos that allow people to say, you're right, I don't need a 40,000 square foot building. I really only need, access to 22,000 on certain days. And how do we integrate with that? And I think that's going to be the challenge, because it's not in our nature for cooperation to come from a university to a city and do that. And the Premier's identified community hubs, but she needs to go further. It's not about youth centers and YMCAs and libraries. It's going to be about a lot more things than that. Yes.
Just sorry, Mark.
No, go ahead.
Just so I can get a picture in my head, I guess, a little bit better. So I didn't know Conestoga would be Stratford as well. So just in relation to the campus, like the university campus, where is Conestoga? And also in relation, I guess, to sort of like the downtown area.
So the Conestoga staff that are in Stratford, and it's not a very big contingent, is actually located at the former nurses' residence on the hospital campus. At one time, I'd be guessing, but I'd say there was 50 to 60 nurses in Stratford on any given year from Conestoga, being trained at the Stratford Hospital, living on the university or the hospital campus, and taking their classes there. And go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, the other interesting thing was that one time the Stratford Normal School, which was built in 1904, it's an interesting story. Normal schools back at the turn of the 19th or the early 1900s they were called normal schools. That's where they taught teachers, and there was 4 of them. These buildings left in the province. When the province stopped it in the late 60s, early 70s, Conestoga College had a footprint of it. If you've ever been to the Stratford Festival, it is the beautiful 3-story red brick building just off the front door of the theater on the park. And the city had to buy that from the province. They wouldn't sell it to us, but we bought it so we could preserve it. And because Conestoga used to run classes in there, and we bought it and turned it over to the theater to use as office space. It's still a city asset. They lease it from us. But that was one of those community hub things that had been integrated into the community that said, look, we got to preserve that. We got to find a way to let the theater grow. We still own it. But we're just trying to find ways to be innovative with our assets.
And then so the Waterloo's campus, where is it?
It's in downtown.
Okay.
It's an interesting thing. The old rail yards were in, I'll tell you, it's a great story I love to tell. The late 1800s, early 1900s, there were one of the largest train yards in North America. Was located in Stratford. Repaired trains for, at the time, the Grand Trunk Railway, then became the Canadian National. It was such a large rail yard in early 1900s. Canadian Pacific Railway wanted to build a roundhouse and put their own train yard in Stratford, and they wanted to do it where the Festival Theatre is located today in the parks. And a local businessman named R. Thomas Orr, whose family is still in the insurance business all these years later, he had the foresight to create the Stratford Parks Board to buy up a bunch of the land, turn it over to the city on the condition that they not allow commercial development in the parks. So imagine the early 1900s when you're a large railway center saying we want no more railway jobs. Thanks very much. Exactly 50 years after he did that, the Stratford Festival opened in a tent for 6 weeks running plays in the very location where they wanted to build the roundhouse. And we just finished a Conference Board of Canada study, $133 million of GDPs generated by the theatre, 3,000 jobs directly and indirectly, and $65 million of taxation. So that's vision, that's long-term planning that maybe happened, it's an unintended consequence of a decision, But that's some of the things that happen with good intentions.
We're just about done for our time. Do we have any other questions? Do we have something online?
Yeah, I do. There's a couple, but I think Dan has addressed some of them. There's a little bit of a delay, so sometimes someone will ask a question, you get to it. So you might have touched on this one a little bit, but Noah's asking, with limits to growth in student population, how can municipalities help increase the quality of education?
Well, I think that there's different pieces of or different aspects that everyone plays. The community is going to be responsible for the experiential or the experience side of it, community integration. They're going to be responsible for provision of services, integrating the communities, the students in the communities, and probably awareness. I think the universities are going to be responsible for their own programmatic levels of expertise, but it's going to require collaboration between the two and actually talking about some of the issues. Another example I would use is in Stratford, we have a drug task force for all of Perth and Huron County, including Stratford. And that is a task force that has school board representatives, healthcare workers, the justice system, the Council of Churches. Like, it has 20 different organizations. The Federation of Agriculture was involved in it. Those are the type of holistic approaches to solving problems that are going to lead to better integration and a better quality of experience for everyone.
Okay, well, Dan, thank you again.
My pleasure.
For a great presentation, and I think it was an interesting discussion. So
thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks to everybody for coming.